The following presentation was given at the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Tupelo in Tupelo, Mississippi. All are welcome to join us on Sundays at 11 a.m. at 1301 Marshall Street in Tupelo.
So, good morning. I am deeply grateful to be with y'all today. What I wanted to share with y'all is something that's been on my mind and heart for about 5 years, ever since I began my internship working with people experiencing homelessness and poverty. And over the years, I've felt called more and more to work on a whole bunch of issues: transphobia, homophobia, sexism, anti-racism, all kinds of things that I couldn't really connect the dots between. And I was preparing to see the MFC in Boston in 2017, and y'all were very supportive and encouraging of me, and I thank you, because that is the most nerve-wracking time in a young, soon-to-be minister's life, I promise you. And so I was trying to figure out what to preach about. And I said to my spouse, I don't know what to use for my sermon, which is arguably the most important sermon that anybody ever preaches, because, at least as UU, because it is kind of the key, right? It gets your foot in the door. And I want you all to know that my wife is much smarter than I am. She absolutely is. And she wisely said, well, everything that you preach about has to do with othering. Why don't you talk about that? And I said, you know what, honey? You're absolutely right. And that's how things often seem to go in our marriage. I wonder if maybe some of y'all have experienced the same thing. I will wrestle and struggle and examine something from every single angle and try to figure something out. And she'll just walk up and say matter-of-factly, well, here's what it is. And she's completely on target. All my agonizing has worked me up into a frenzy, and she just easily slices through all of it with one blade of truth. See, I told y'all she's a lot smarter than me. So with her help, I've figured out that my calling is to work in the area of othering, which is very broad and, as we said, encompasses a bunch of different things. So I feel like I'm called to side with people who felt cast out in one form or another, and it can come in many forms. I first found Unitarian Universalism in 1998, and when I did, I discovered a breadth and depth to a gorgeous theology that still astonishes me in its complexity, its clarity, and its power. Because of the beautifully crafted principles of our faith, I firmly believe that nobody is disposable. Nobody. And it's a lot easier to say that than it is to live it. There are some people that really test my commitment to the first principle daily. So I believe we don't pay enough attention to a lot of things. We may try not to notice people experiencing homelessness, for example. I personally will pull up to a stoplight and somebody will be standing there with their little cardboard sign, and I feel awkward. I might look away, I might look down. If I have change, I might scramble for it, but all of this is while the clock is ticking and the light's about to change, right? I still don't plan ahead for these things. But I know in talking to my friends experiencing homelessness that when we just pretend not to see them, it hurts. So I think that if we can, the least we can do is look them in the eye and smile. And if we have change, we can share it. If we have a snack in our purse or seat, we can pass that over if we want to. I think sometimes we claim we don't see the color of people's skin. But I think we do say it. Those of us who are white just pretend not to. We think it's not nice to mention it. And I think actually what's not nice is being silent, because it makes us complicit in white supremacy. And that's why it continues. If every white person in America stood up, spoke out, said, this is ridiculous, we're not doing this anymore, the whole system would grind to a halt. Even if half of us did. But it's complicated, right? So we don't. The whole rotten system of racially driven injustice depends on us cooperating with it. On the same token, straight people might say that sexual orientation and gender identity aren't a big deal, that gay and lesbian and bisexual people are just like straight people. Well, yes and no. Yes, our intimate relationships are every bit as boring as yours. And we're still at risk of losing our jobs or our housing or other things due to homophobia, to prejudice, stuff like that. Cisgender is a word that means our identity matches what was on our birth certificate. And cisgender people might think that transgender people are asking for special rights to have a bathroom that corresponds to their gender identity or asking for a gender-neutral bathroom. But I have a friend who is trans who is terrified of going into public restrooms because transgender women are at very high risk of being assaulted. And so she holds it all day until she gets home. It's not good for your body, I don't think, but that's what she does so that she can be safe. My argument is that these differences matter because people are treated badly, and if we don't pay attention, then it keeps happening. The current administration, not too long ago, announced that they are going to try to do a new federal regulation that would allow discrimination against LGBTQ plus people in cases of adoption, elder care, health care, youth homelessness, STI and HIV prevention, and more. This proposal would enshrine bigotry under the guise of religious freedom into permanent policy. I think that a judge recently overturned it, but you know they're going to try it again because that's what this administration does. We live in a country where there's a wide chasm between what have been called the haves and the have-nots, right? And those with money and resources are mostly white people, and those without are mostly not white people. Stratification and separation result in people mostly spending time with others who share their same background, race, socioeconomic. This segregation happens at work, in our neighborhoods, and on Sunday in church. So I've been questioning myself. How many close friends do I have who don't look like me, who don't have a similar level of education to me, right? Who don't have a different income than I do? Who have a different faith background, for that matter? Due to how we tend to other each other, emotional needs can go unmet on all levels of society. I would say that the modern world is currently experiencing an epidemic in loneliness and isolation, in spite of, or maybe even because of, the increasingly fast speed of online communication. And we put othering on top of all of that, and it's just a big soupy mess, right? So we have a lot of acquaintances, but very few close, real friends. A lot of us, not all of us, of course. I think that human beings were designed with needs for connection and closeness, but we're increasingly separated. So you might wonder what can be done to change this. A group of us got together to discuss the idea this summer, and a new kind of Unitarian Universalist congregation was born. Or maybe not a new kind, but new to me, for sure. So we were inspired by the example of that wandering prophet that you may have heard of, who held pastoral conversations everywhere he went. He didn't have a building or a church, and he made no distinctions between who he would and would not talk to. He was pretty well known with hanging out with people that society had deemed not ideal, right? Tax collectors, for example. So Resistance Street Church held our first service on July 28th of this year, and we meet every Sunday afternoon, regardless of weather. Our goal is to build community and be fully present with whoever joins us. So we're in a public park. Anybody can walk up. Hopefully we are an inviting group of people. We don't exist to hand out food or provide shelter. So it's not charity, it's solidarity. At least that's the idea. The purpose of this group is in building relationship. And it's also about belonging instead of inclusion. I think the word belonging implies we all have an equal stake in something and an equal right to be there. And inclusion is more like, well, I've got this thing and I'll let you be a part of it. And that's what we don't want to do. Our cathedral is a grove of oak trees, and some of y'all were there for my ordination, and I deeply thank you for that. That was such a gift of love. We're trying to be a spiritual home for those who feel like they have no place, who aren't welcome in their family because of their orientation, who aren't welcome in their church, or have been told that they don't fit in because they're too gender fabulous for just one box marked M or F. We're a place for people who might not happen to have an electric bill or a permanent address. A place for people that might have been targeted due to the color of their skin or lack of official documentation. What we hope to do is marginalized people are in the center. That's the hope. That's what we're working on. That's the idea, but in practice, it's usually about half a dozen people, maybe a few more, and we have a nice time. We have good conversation, and we enjoy the fresh air. And I like to joke that even if nobody shows up, the squirrels and I will have a fabulous time. So far, that hasn't happened, but it's going to get cold soon. You may think that sounds nice, sure, but what can traditional churches do in terms of outreach in a theologically just way? When I was in the first couple of months of my internship 5 years ago, Reverend Mary Gans gave me this quote, which is attributed to Aboriginal artist and activist Lila Watson. And she says this: "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." Reverend Gans told me to hold this quote in my heart and ponder it and get back to her in a month and tell her what I'd learned. Well, I did, but I kept hanging on to that quote for the next year, easy, probably more than that. And it really began to grow on me. And what I've learned is that we have to recognize that all the isms are connected. And I'm not the first one to come up with this. Y'all might remember some kind of quote, which I didn't bother to get exact in here, but where Reverend King said something about we're caught in a web of inescapable mutuality, something about that. It's the same idea, that it's all tied together. So, for example, the difficulties of a young mother of color who isn't paid a living wage. She might work at a fast food restaurant. That's connected to me getting my daughter some French fries. She's in the car, she says, "I want French fries." I go get them. It's cheap, it's convenient, and 99 cents for French fries means that this young lady doesn't get paid what she should be paid for what she's doing. I argue that it's no longer possible for me, and maybe for others, to sit comfortably while stuff like this happens, while other people struggle. A living wage, for example, the Fight for 15 movement, that could really change somebody's life if they're working in a fast food restaurant and trying to make ends meet. The young mother isn't any different than me or you or anybody else. There's no us and them. There's only we. It's all connected to things like unjust incarceration, to disparities in education, which is connected to massive corporations poisoning our environment, which happens right here in the Delta, as we all know. And this isn't about being a good person or saving anybody. What I'm trying to say is that I think this is about fighting for the whole of us. So fighting alongside people or behind other people's leadership, not on behalf of. We have to look to the leadership of those directly impacted. A friend recently said to me that during the time of slavery, if she'd been alive, she would have been freeing people held in bondage. I told her, well, no, since we're both white women, if you and I aren't fighting today against the evils that exist, we wouldn't have been fighting against it back then either. 200 years ago, we wouldn't have been better people than we are right now. The profound truth is that liberation for all of us is not possible until we have liberation for each of us, especially those who've been cast aside, thrown out, told that they're not welcome, not good enough, not worthy. I saw the phrase last night. I couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, so I sat up reading. The phrase, "None of us are free until all of us are free." I didn't know where that came from, but I found it in a book last night, and someone had written that, somebody named, an attorney named Lawrence, in an argument for affirmative action. And maybe he got it from somebody before him. But it's a good phrase. None of us are free until all of us are free. So I wonder, what would liberation look like for Unitarian Universalists? I think those of us that are white can't just ask, why don't more people of color want to come to our church? Most UU churches are overwhelmingly, painfully focused on white norms and white voices and white experiences. I wonder what it would look like to center people that aren't white in our worship, in our conversations, in our outreach. What would it look like to follow the guidance of African American leaders in our community or in our faith tradition? We have something in Unitarian Universalism called BLUE, which stands for Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. They've made a suggestion that we should have an 8th principle. The 8th principle of Unitarian Universalism, which is proposed at this point, is we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. And I talked to somebody recently who said, well, I don't know if we need an 8th principle. Isn't it all in the first 7? Maybe, but have we been working very hard on dismantling racism and other oppressions in Unitarian Universalism? I can't see it. So I think the 8th principle would be a really good step. Another possibility is we could do like a 6-month study of white supremacy as a congregation. Tupelo could do that. I'd be happy to help. Lots of folks could do that. There's also Black authors and thinkers and activists that write a lot that we could read and follow and learn from. I think if we want to do more justice in the world, it's not about handing out coats and making sandwiches, although I've done that for years. I'm the first one to say I've been doing it for a long time. I think instead it's about building relationships and letting those bonds guide us into how to make things better for all of us. I think the root of solidarity is asking good questions. It's looking to the system instead of the symptom. It's figuring out why people are hungry instead of just having food. And it's putting your body on the line, putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak. I think a theology of liberation for Unitarian Universalists might be rooted in paying more attention to how incredibly valuable every single human life is. Every single one. And I think our responsibility to each other can be reflected in the word resistance. So, because I've worked with unhoused people a lot, this could refer to the elements of wind and sun and water that our friends who live unsheltered deal with every day. But it also could refer to the attitude of defiance, which is so necessary in our current world. In an age where children are placed in cages by immigration and customs enforcement, also known as ICE. When slavery is still legal in the United States under the 13th Amendment. And when the sitting president of the United States uses racist rhetoric almost daily, and he supports white supremacists openly, and he's still president. When LGBTQ citizens live in fear of the wrong person being offended by their gender identity or their orientation, because transgender women of color are being murdered at the highest rate of any group. when unarmed citizens of color have been getting killed at the hands of police, and even when it's on video, most of the time juries fail to convict. I think resistance to empire was the heart of the gospel when Jesus was alive. And I think it's the heart of what Unitarian Universalists would call our gospel of love and justice. I think this is what we can and must do to be true to our faith. It is holy work to challenge empire and support others in that battle. And I think that we need each other. Since every one of us is precious, we are all in this together. And the only way to get some of us freed is to know our vast connectedness and to work collectively to defeat these oppressions. I've been wondering what legacy I will leave behind. What legacy will we leave behind? May we all find within ourselves a little holy boldness in service to fighting for what is right, so that the world is a more just and equitable place for us all. Amen, and blessed be.
Thanks for listening to the UUC of Tupelo's podcast. You can find us at uuctupeloms.org, on Facebook by searching for UUC Tupelo, or contact us by email at uuctupelocom@gmail.com. That's uuctupelocom@gmail.com. The UUC of Tupelo is a welcoming congregation who accept all people, regardless of creed, color, national origin, gender, or gender identity. We hope you have enjoyed this podcast, and as you head on your way, go in peace, believe in peace, create peace.